Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael and we're going to be getting right back into some more Reddit stories. If you enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Now, without further ado, let's begin. This story was posted by a user named Looking to Survive in the Surviving Infidelity subreddit. The post is titled, "I ghosted a cheating ex-wife. Years later, I married my child's nanny and now I am a statistic and a trope. But I am so happy. I really struggled with making this post because my divorce is still a great source of anger at times. Not as much as it used to be, but it really triggers my negative thoughts. My therapist told me that it helps to write in a journal. My ex-wife and I had a 2-year relationship. We had our son before we married, and I tried really hard to be a good husband and father. Starting as an introvert meant that I really had to start from scratch, but I can honestly say I did my best to learn. My ex and I were total opposites. Maybe opposites attracted in the beginning, but then we started to butt heads a lot. My ex-wife, I learned, hated to compromise and would use bullying and gaslighting tactics to get her way. She was a spender and wanted to splurge on things because she thought she deserved it. Looking back, she wasn't really a good mom or wife. She was very self-centered and spent more time on her phone than with me or my son. I took care of everything, including my son's hospital visits, while she didn't want any more responsibility. I was burned out from all the work and responsibilities. The last straw was when she cheated on me with her ex. Both of us knew that infidelity was unacceptable from the beginning and a deal breaker. As soon as I learned about it, I knew that I needed to leave or start a fight. So I carefully planned how I was going to leave. I found a house to rent 2 hours away from where we were, removed myself from the apartment lease and all of the utilities, took my name off the joint account we had, and moved while my wife went out for some facial therapy. Before I left, I took her divorce papers with copies of evidence that I also sent to her family members at the same time the moving company, and I left our old apartment. I blocked her on everything I could. Basically, I left everything in 6 hours. After moving everything into my new place, I was bombarded by texts and calls from her side of the family. Mostly, I received apologies from her cousins since they knew what might happen from the beginning. Her mom apologized a lot, saying that she didn't raise her daughter well, and both she and my ex's aunt begged me to reconsider the divorce. Then I started getting messages of threats and insults from my ex at a different number. I just kept blocking those numbers, but it got so bad that I ended up getting a new phone. The divorce was slightly rough because of my ex. She tried to say that I kidnapped our son and attempted to sue me, but I presented all the facts. I was solely responsible for everything at home and for our son's health and speech therapy, etc. The judge was surprisingly understanding and said that since I was the primary caregiver for my son, he dismissed my ex's claim. Then I presented all of the evidence of my ex's infidelity, including all the money she spent. I even got the AP to confess. Because of all the evidence, I was awarded almost all of our money. I just had to pay my ex a little bit of alimony for a year since she quit her job. During custody proceedings, I was granted primary custody while my ex received a supervised visitation. She only got that because of all the threatening messages she sent me. She literally shot herself in the foot. It was difficult for her because I now lived 2 hours away from her by car and she couldn't drive. So she didn't even visit our son for months until she got her cousin to drive her. I really realized how bad it was only after I started living by myself with my son. I felt like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders and I felt at peace with myself, so I decided to make the best of this change. I still worked from home, and because of my son's autism, I was able to get a care provider to look after him and a therapist to help with his therapy at home. It was so much better that I can't describe it in words. My ex shifted tactics after a few months of seeing our son, saying that she regretted her actions and wanted to be a better person for both me and our son, but I wasn't having it. One time, she came with her luggage and tried to move in, but I refused and called the cops. She resorted to everything from gaslighting to crying in an attempt to get her way again, so I told her to never come back. I even got the judge to deny her visitation since she tried to force her way into moving in a few times. She then started love bombing me with texts. She even got her mom and aunt to help her, but since that was still with my old phone, I ended up giving it up for cell phone disposal for a chunk of change. Then about 1 school year passed and my son's care provider and I got really close. She was very sweet and gentle, so much different from my ex. She was helpful, thoughtful, and positive. However, she was 11 years younger than me, so I didn't make any advances. But one day when my son was down for his nap, she cooked me a wonderful meal and we ate together. She confessed that she was attracted to me. She told me that she wanted to date me for real. Initially, I thought it wasn't going to be that smooth since respite care providers have rules about fraternization and getting close with clients. The age gap was certainly an issue as well, but she said that she would quit her provider work if she had to. I told her I needed time to think and process. My divorce had really shattered my desire to date anyone, but I was so attracted to her. So I told her that I would like to take things slowly and properly. After 4 years of dating and her graduating to become a full-time nurse, we tied the knot. I learned from my past mistakes and decided to be a much better husband to her. Thanks to her vivaciousness, that wasn't hard to do. My son even calls her now. In fact, the first time he did that was when I knew that I had to marry her. I admit that I took the relationship very slowly because I wanted to be careful. Strangely enough, I am still close with my ex's cousins. They are all old school. While they care for my ex, they respect me even more and always ask about my son and how I'm doing. All of them are either firefighters or military personnel, so they don't play around. They even invite my family and me on vacations with them. And now the sore portion that still makes me angry, my ex. She somehow found out about my wife a few years back and confronted her at her nursing school. That really scared my now wife, and I nearly punched her when I came to break up the situation. My now wife and I filed more restraining orders against her. Now my ex is not allowed to be anywhere near my family, even our son. After our divorce finalized, she returned to work and got herself living alone. Over the years, she tried to get her cousins to convince me to help her, but they straight up refused. Even her mom and aunt gave her up. In our last conversation, she told me what she could have done to get me back, and I jokingly said that she would have to join the military to learn some discipline. And she actually did join, only to be kicked out for some disciplinary reason. Now she is just passive-aggressive, posting on social media about forgiveness, second chances, and how modern women are victims. Some of her followers actually believe her lies. My current wife told me not to worry about it. She is so kind and understanding, knowing that I have many trust issues. We are planning to have our first child together soon, and I want to do things better this time. I guess the moral of the story that I want to tell every betrayed man is that there is always someone who will love and respect you more than your current spouse. Don't settle for anything less. User Technical Button said, I honestly wish I had moved like this after I got cheated on. This is some next level boss shit. I'm happy you respect yourself. You deserve better. Good for you. Update. So I've been getting a lot of chat requests for additional context, updates, and information. A lot of people ask me about red flags and not seeing them before and after I married both times. The first time I married, I didn't see any glaring red flags, but in my defense, it was 4 years ago, and my list of red flags to check for was pretty short. In my second marriage, my list of possible red flags was significantly larger, hence the 4-year relationship before the marriage. I would say that experience from my first marriage definitely helped in that. Not to mention, my second wife is leagues above my first wife. To be honest, that is somewhat expected as my first wife came from a broken home with multiple half-siblings. Her mother never married yet had 4 daughters with 3 different fathers. That should have been my first clue, and that's just not her. Her aunt is like that, most of her cousins on her mother's side are like that, etc. My second wife, on the other hand, came from a very stable family. She is the second youngest of 6 siblings, and they have a very tight family support system. After I proved that I was serious in this relationship, they have become my family as well. As for my wife's occupation, there seems to be this notion that nurses cheat with other nurses and doctors in the hospital. With this, all I can say is I trust my wife enough that she doesn't cheat on me because she goes out of her way to call me during her work hours and to placate my fears. She and I signed a prenup as well that if she cheats on me, she gets nothing. I can't control her actions or push myself to be a helicopter husband or hire a private investigator to watch her every move. I have taken another leap of faith with her, yes, and I just pray that this time it is different. But if it is not, my nuclear option remains. My child is getting along very well with my current wife as well. Since his mother spends little time with him because of the restraining order and everything, he has grown so attached to my current wife that he cries when we drop him off at school and runs after her whenever she walks away. He's currently 4 and still at that age when children are attached to their mothers. Since my ex never really spent time with him, I guess he never got attached to her in the beginning. Another thing involving my ex-wife is that she has been trying to get over the restraining order so that she could see our son in person instead of just video chats. She even said that she would pay all of the child support and arrears that she owes, which at first made me surprised that she even had that much money to give, because I believe she owes about $10K. I reached out to her cousins who I still talk with because they respect me more than they do her, to see what changed for her, like if she got a sugar daddy or something. It turns out that she started an OnlyFans, at which point I went to the custody center saying that I will not allow her to interact with a sex worker. This may seem extremely petty to some of you, and while it may be, I will not allow our son to be in contact with sexually transmitted diseases. I don't know what kind of content she does on OnlyFans, but I don't care, and having an OnlyFans worker as a parent just doesn't sit right with me. I am debating on asking my ex to sign away her parental rights. This is not to punish her, but I need to set hard boundaries. If she did have a sugar daddy, maybe it would have been better because those things can be ignored or hidden. But an OnlyFans account? Come on. Final update. So my ex-wife is now in prison for public indecency, breaking the restraining order, public intoxication, DUI, resisting arrest, along with many other charges that I didn't know about. She got 5 years. She was arrested a few months ago and couldn't afford to bail or bond herself out. She asked me to help her, but I rejected her because it was ridiculous. She then got a public defender who tried hard to reduce her charges to misdemeanors or something, but the judge didn't want to take a chance on her due to her history. She was finally sentenced last month, 5 years in prison, out at the end of 2029. She might get out early for good behavior, but who knows. If I was still angry at her, I would feel satisfied, maybe even euphoric that karma finally caught up with her, but all I can feel for her is pity. Sure, she put herself in this situation, and all of her actions following the separation and divorce were on her and her alone. This was made more evident for me when I finally visited her in prison. Through the public defender, she begged to talk to me and my wife one last time. She didn't want our son to come though, because she didn't want him to remember her in prison. So last week, my wife and I visited her through one of those rooms with the glass and phone. Honestly, she looked better than I had seen her before, probably because she wasn't under the influence. After a few introductions and words, my ex apologized to my wife for everything and asked her to watch over her son. Being the angel that she is, my wife accepted and assured her that she has always loved him like her own. After that, my wife left and left me and my ex to talk by ourselves. We talked about how we were doing, and she finally said that she's sorry and that she won't ever bother me again. She is planning to go back to her home country after prison because she can't really do anything with a record. I told her that I wish she would get better, and she said that she can't go lower than what she is now. That's it, I guess. I won't be bothered with her again. I had already ghosted her, divorced her, put a restraining order against her, and removed her from my life before all of this. This next post was made in the relationship advice subreddit by a user named Practical Leg. The post is titled, "I think my husband is starting to resent our daughter. How do I deal with this?" I'm posting this on a throwaway account because my husband knows my account and I feel bad about bringing our problems to the internet, but I don't have anyone else I can turn to about this without things getting worse. I don't even know where to start with this. For some context, my husband and I have been together for nearly 16 years and married for 10. We met while he was passing by the city I lived in at the time for work-related reasons. After keeping in touch over the phone for a long while and multiple hints and signs from my end, he confessed his love for me, and we've been together since. He moved in with me after 3 years and settled in well. My family loves him, and he managed to land a good job as a high school history teacher at a nearby school. Throughout our entire relationship, he has been very loving and nurturing, always taking my feelings into consideration and going far out of his way to keep both of us happy. He is incredibly sweet and a huge sweetheart, and even after being with him for 16 years, my love for him hasn't faltered at all. With that being said, it's a big reason why his recent behavior has completely blindsided me, and I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. We had our first child, who I'll call D for now, almost 5 years ago. My pregnancy was incredibly smooth and easygoing, and throughout it all, my husband was even more gentle and loving towards me, which made me feel incredibly lucky to be starting a family with him. There were some complications with the birth, but overall it was a very wonderful experience, and we were both overjoyed to finally have our daughter. For the first month or so, my husband was stubbornly persistent that I let him do all the heavy lifting and focus solely on myself and D. During this time, he took up nearly all the house chores and made sure to spend time with D whenever I needed a break. Once we both started going to work again, he called my parents during his lunch break to make sure everything was going okay. During D's later infancy and in her early baby years, he laid back a little bit more and stopped checking in as much, but by no means did he give her less attention. However, over time, I noticed that he was gradually spending less and less time with D and seemed to be focusing on his work more. I love D with all of my heart, and I am so incredibly grateful and happy she is in our lives, but I would be lying if I said she was an easy baby. She is incredibly stubborn and lively for her age, so when my husband and I aren't scrambling to make sure she doesn't get herself hurt or do something she isn't supposed to, we're busy calming her down from a tantrum, and it can be a little taxing. Moreover, I've begun to notice how much it seems to be wearing down on my husband. Nowadays, he is less motivated or energetic than he used to be. He is still sweet to me, but he's beginning to pull away from me and D, and our life in the bedroom is completely dead at this point. Despite this, the most upsetting thing I've noticed recently is how distant he's become with D. The other day, she was excitedly trying to tell him during breakfast about this show she had been watching, and he just put his cereal in the fridge and walked away. The look on Dee's face after she asked me why he was ignoring her completely shattered my heart. Another problem we've been having recently is how little he's doing to help with Dee. Every morning I wake up early to get her dressed and fed for the day before driving her to school and then picking her up later that day. I take her to every doctor appointment, every dentist visit, every play date, and every event at her school. It feels like the only time my husband is around Dee is after she gets home from school to make everyone food. This has caused many arguments between the two of us where I'm asking him why he doesn't put any effort into his relationship with Dee, and he gets defensive but never really gives me an answer. What compelled me to post here was an argument we had earlier this week right as I was ready to walk out the door to get Dee to the babysitter since no one would be home to take care of her. I honestly can't remember how it started, but I know it started as something small that escalated quickly. Many hurtful words were exchanged, and I'll be the first to admit that many of the things I told him were out of line. He started going on a rant about how much he did for our family and how hard this was on him, to which I interrupted him and asked how it was so hard for him when I was the one doing everything related to Dee. He just snapped at me that if it weren't for her, things wouldn't be this hard. We both went quiet after he said that, and I probably would have torn him a new one if I weren't so shocked. He suddenly decided he needed to go on a walk to clear his head. This all feels like a complete shock to me, as I'd been under the impression that my husband was happy and just going through a rough time. Yet after that comment, I haven't stopped rethinking every aspect of our relationship after Dee. I feel heartbroken and numb, and I have no idea where to go from here. My husband and I have hardly been talking to each other since the fight, and honestly, I have no idea what I'd even say. At this point, it's starting to drain me, and although I love him very much, if he doesn't start getting his act together, I'm not sure I'll be able to handle it much longer. What can I do about this? I can't imagine my future without him, and I don't want to divorce him, but I'm tired and stressed out and trying not to cry myself to sleep tonight thinking about it. User Competitive Mud said, "From everything you've said here, I can't help but think your husband is burned out. You need to talk to him, as several others have said, and ask him to finish that sentence. Then you need to give him a safe space to be honest with you. That's very important. You talk about him taking on everything, and I just wonder if he eventually wore out and this is the result. If he is feeling what you think, there is probably a lot of shame around it, and he is probably just shoving it down and making everything worse by shame spiraling. Talk when tensions are not high. Don't address this during a fight. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt based on what you've said, but be prepared that you might not like his answers. Of course, always protect yourself and your child first." To this, OP said, "I am starting to worry that there might be something going on with his emotional and mental health. In the past, he's shown signs of something underlying that made me raise an eyebrow, but I shrugged them off because most of the time he was very happy and well-rounded. I guess it's all starting to boil over at this point, and I'm really worried I made it worse with the argument since he's even more distant now." User Valiant Strawberry said, "Does your husband have anywhere he can open up emotionally without fear of retaliation? You said yourself that you expressed things during this argument that were way out of line. Does he have anyone he can talk to about this without fear of being judged or you blowing up on him? I'd be distant with my partner too if I thought opening up about my feelings would make them fly off the handle and say cruel things to me. The communication breakdown here is severe, and I agree that couples counseling is probably your best shot at salvaging your relationship, but you need to take a good hard look at whether you're an emotional safe space for your husband or if he's distancing himself because he feels he can't be honest with you for fear of your reaction. User Thin Knight said, "This is not good, OP. It sounds like he's been stuffing his feelings because a good man wouldn't dislike his daughter. If he had been able to be vulnerable and say he was feeling upset and exhausted months or years ago, he probably could have laughed it off together." Yes, sometimes kids can be difficult, and it's normal not to like them at times. It doesn't make you a bad parent as long as you continue to take care of yourself and the child. Look for ways to connect with them and appreciate the joy they bring when they're being less difficult. But it very much sounds like he has let himself ruminate for so long that he feels stuck, and the problem doesn't appear to have a solution or an end. Instead, he is living in a fantasy land where the child just isn't around. It has gotten bad enough that he is allowing himself to actually act out some of those fantasies by avoiding and ignoring her. It may be worth saying aloud at least once, being a parent is allowed to be hard. You are allowed to feel dislike for your kids sometimes, or to feel like it is hard to connect with them if they are fussy. You are allowed to ask your co-parent or other resources for help connecting with a strong-willed child who wears you out. I am so sorry you have been feeling alone in those thoughts and let it get to this point. It doesn't have to feel this way. We can't ignore that you are feeling like your child is the reason for your adult problems, and I know that's not the man you are. I want to help. And offer to help him, making it clear that he needs to accept the help for you both to move forward in a healthy way. If he breaks down in relief and asks for help and is receptive to it, I would try to practice the same grace for him that you would want, focusing on getting him some parenting skills support. If, however, he remains adamant that this is all your daughter's fault, it will be time for some really hard choices. Update. A lot has happened since I last posted, and in all honesty, I don't know where to begin. I guess I should start by telling you that my husband and I are going to couples counseling, and I'm very optimistic about things going back to the way they were before everything started to boil over. I want to take a moment to thank everyone who commented and helped me understand what he and I are going through and how to navigate it. Someone even recommended an episode from a podcast that helped me a lot. I didn't expect this to get so much attention, but either way, I am very grateful for everyone who left helpful and insightful advice for me. That being said, this update is going to be very long, so buckle up. When I originally posted, the argument that sparked my post happened almost a whole week before, though now it has been a little over a week since we had the argument. The day after I posted, I decided to look into therapy and counseling for my husband and me, as well as play therapy for Dee. Some people suggested that her being so dysfunctional wasn't normal and that she might be going through something related or unrelated to my husband's and my behavior. I spent all day making a list of what I needed or wanted to bring up during our talk that I planned to have later that day. I was kind of obsessing over what I wanted to say and how to say it, as many of you suggested, being gentle with my wording and encouraging honesty and transparency. Dee was sick, so she didn't go to school, and I alternated between focusing on preparing for the talk and making sure she was okay and taken care of while my husband was at work. I was in the middle of getting some medicine for my daughter around 12:30 p.m. when my husband called me. I answered, and he asked how my day was going and if there was anything he needed to do after he got off work or when he got back home. I was a little surprised by his call since he hasn't called me on his lunch break for a check-in in a long while. I could be crazy, but it sounded like he'd just been crying because his voice was a little raspy and quiet. We talked for all of his lunch break until eventually he had to go and hung up. To be honest, it made me really worried because although he used to do this all the time before Dee arrived, he hasn't done it in a while, and I was overthinking why he would have called me. I think Dee realized I was troubled because of her father because when I came back, she asked who I was talking to. When I told her, she asked in a very quiet and sad voice if I was sad because Papa was ignoring me as well. Now, I'm a very resilient woman, especially when it comes to putting on a brave face for my daughter, but after she said that, I felt so distraught and guilty about how aware she is of the situation and how she thinks about her relationship with her father that I started crying, which in turn made her cry as well. While we were hugging, I made sure to reassure her that her father will always love her and that he's just having a bad time. She then told me how she didn't want him to be having a bad time. I took the chance to ask her if she was having a bad time, and she admitted that she was sad because she thought Papa didn't love her and that she wanted him to be happy again. We both cuddled on her bed, and eventually I fell asleep comforting her. I woke up later that day, and by that time, the sun had already set. Dee was still sleeping, and I could hear my husband watching something in our room. I got up, and after making sure Dee was properly tucked in, I headed into our room. Once my husband noticed me, he paused the show he was watching and asked me how I slept. I told him I slept fine and asked how his day went. He said it was fine as well. I decided to join him in bed and he offered me a pillow for my back before unpausing the TV. It felt awkward. It was clear there was something he wanted to tell me and that I needed to talk to him, but neither of us knew how to start the conversation. Eventually, at some point, he laid his head down on my lap and I started stroking his hair. He had his arm under my legs and we both sat in silence for a while as we watched TV. Eventually, I decided that we needed to talk and I wasn't going to delay it any longer. So I paused the TV and asked him if we could talk. He seemed really hesitant and kind of tensed up, but he said sure. I took a deep breath and tried to remember everything I'd written down on the list earlier. I started off by saying how I'd noticed him withdrawing and being distant for a few years now, and after our argument a week ago, I was starting to get really worried. I didn't try to sugarcoat it, I wasn't being hostile or accusatory, but I made sure to be very clear that Dee and I were starting to be affected by his behavior and that under no circumstances could this go on. I was tearing up a little bit and at some point, he flipped around in my lap and hugged my stomach as I kept talking. I went on a bit of a rant about how tired I was, how I felt like he wasn't doing enough to help, and how worried I was about him. I brought up a few of your points and mentioned how his behavior toward Dee was negligent and that he was setting her up for a lifetime of pain if he didn't stop. I didn't feel good about saying it, but I needed him to understand the gravity of the situation. At this point, I could tell he started crying because his breathing began to hiccup, and I could feel my shirt getting wet where his face was. Not to mention, he was trembling as he held me tighter. My husband is and has always been a very emotional man. Though typically he doesn't cry much, seeing him cry so silently while shaking so hard made me really nervous and worried. I practically begged him to talk to me. He just kept clinging on to me for a long moment, and I thought he wasn't going to answer me before he told me with a very choked up voice how sorry he was. He sat up and explained how he'd never wanted to hurt me or Dee, but that everything had been so hard on him recently that he had no idea what to do about it and just started clamming up. I asked him to elaborate, but he just got really choked up and seemed to struggle to get his words out. I was worried he was going to shut down and pull away. In that moment, I admitted that I had posted here to get some advice and thought he should look through some of your comments to understand things better. He agreed, so I gave him my phone while rubbing his back as he read through the comments. After reading for a while, he gave me back my phone. Even though he tried to keep himself together, it was clear he was barely holding it together. I told him that I wasn't going to interrupt him and wanted him to be honest with me about what was going on. After saying that, he completely broke down. He talked for a very long time and his thoughts were all over the place. So I'm going to try my best to explain everything he said in chronological order here to avoid confusion. As I mentioned in the original post, my husband and I met a while back while he was visiting my city before he eventually moved in with me while we were dating. Something that's relevant now, which I hadn't mentioned previously, is that my husband is from a different country and migrated to the US about 2 years before we met. He told me that back home, his dad wasn't really there and he could count on one hand the number of conversations they had together that lasted more than 10 minutes. His mother was always very stressed out and didn't seem to like him or his siblings very much. Because he has always been very sensitive and was never into what other kids his age liked, he had a poor relationship with most of his brothers. The only family member who is still alive and with whom he talks is his younger sister. However, due to reasons he asked me to keep private, their relationship is very strained. My husband and I are different in many ways. I'm more outgoing, outdoorsy, and confident, while he tends to be quieter, nerdy, and in some aspects a little insecure. Because of this, our social circles hardly overlap. As a commenter recently pointed out to me, I regretfully knew close to nothing about my husband's group of friends or who he hangs out with besides me. Well, as it turns out, he doesn't have many friends. He told me that at the beginning he met 2 guys at a bar who he became friends with. He mentioned them briefly early on in our relationship, but didn't talk about them much, and I admit I never bothered to ask. He told me how they were always planting ideas in his mind, that I was holding him back, and that dating an older woman when he was still so young and should have been experimenting was something he would regret in the future when he was old and no one wanted him anymore. He defended me and told them to stop talking about me like that. He admitted he kept hanging out with them because they were his only friends, and when they weren't bad-mouthing me, they were really fun. However, after he got a job and got married, they stopped talking to him as much. When they did finally meet up again, they showed up with a female friend of theirs and told him to have fun one last time before he tied himself down. He got into a huge fight with them that almost turned physical had it not been for the girl stepping in to break them up. My husband came home in a horrible mood. I remember that day a little. When I asked him why he was so mad, he just said he got into an argument with someone at the grocery store and that's why he was upset. Even at the time, I didn't believe him, but I didn't press him further since he was practically hiding himself away in our bed and clearly didn't want to talk. He told me how since then he's been having an impossible time trying to make new friends. Even though he's gotten used to how distant people are in America compared to his home country, he still feels incredibly lonely and isolated. For nearly 16 years, he's been trying to make up for all the social interaction he's been craving through his one work friend, or by ignoring it and putting all his attention and time into me so he felt less lonely. When Dee was born, he put every last drop of effort into me and her, hardly stopping to relax since any time he did reminded him of the giant hole in his life. Through sobs, he admitted there had been many times he'd been tempted to drink or hurt himself just to forget about it, but never went through with it because he wanted to stay strong for his family. He also knew there was a history of alcoholism in his family and couldn't bear the thought of losing himself to it. He explained how, after putting so much focus on his life, he completely crashed and felt tired and lost all the time. With how much Dee started to act out and how taxing it was to take care of her, he began thinking back to what his old friends had told him and wondered if this was what they'd been talking about. He was practically stumbling over himself, apologizing to me for letting them get into his head and for allowing himself to blame and resent Dee and me for everything wrong in his life. At this point, he was having a hard time breathing and was hugging me so tightly, I thought my spine would snap. It was so painful seeing him trying to keep his sobs quiet to avoid waking Dee up, despite the fact that he was clearly spiraling. I had to interrupt him so he could calm down because at that point he was going down a rabbit hole of guilt and regret, just apologizing over and over again. There's a lot more he told me about the state of his mental health at the moment, but just thinking about it makes me tear up. I know I shouldn't, but I've been beating myself up for not noticing how he felt so much sooner. I can't help but think how horrible of a wife and partner I must be not to notice he's been drowning this whole time. And I didn't even think to ask him about his life or friends or anything. It was the longest talk we've had in the entirety of our relationship, and by the end of it, we were both crying and holding each other. I made sure he knew how much Dee and I loved him and appreciated everything he's done for us. I told him I would be by his side every step of the way and that I would make sure he got the help he needed. It was the first time we'd snuggled so closely like we did that night in a while, and miraculously, he didn't toss or turn at all that night. I stayed up as long as I could, kissing his face, rubbing his back, and making sure he felt loved, even long after he fell asleep. The next day, I asked him if he could call out of work for the day so we could just focus on each other and make sure everything we wanted to say was said. He agreed. We spent the day bowling, eating at the local cafe, going to an ice cream shop, and then going home to make dinner together and have another talk about next steps. We've agreed to start marriage counseling and also get him into individual therapy to see what's going on and ensure he can recover from all the bad feelings and thoughts he's been having. Many people in the original post theorized that he might be depressed, and after everything he's told me, I'm almost 100% sure that's the problem. We both picked Dee up from school and asked if she wanted to play at the park. She was very happy to go. I let my husband take the lead and watched as the two played on the playground and chased each other in the grass. I hadn't seen him that happy and energized in a very long time, and it made my heart swell. On the car ride home, he sat in the back seat with her and played I Spy out the car window until Dee excitedly told me how happy she was that Papa loved her again. I could practically hear my husband's heart shatter from the driver's seat. He was quiet for a very long time before hugging her without saying a word for the rest of the car ride home. Dee had a very guilty expression on her face seeing my husband get so sad, and I think my husband noticed because when we got home, he quickly excused himself to the bedroom for a second before coming back out almost as happy as he had been in the park, trying to make Dee feel better. The rest of the day went smoothly, and as I was getting ready in the bathroom to go to bed, I heard my husband in the next room telling Dee how much he loved her and how he never hated her, and that he never wanted her to think so. I could hear them reading a bedtime story while I waited in bed, and eventually my husband came into our room and got in bed with me. We talked a little bit more, and I told him how proud I was of him for how far he's come and all he's managed to survive before kissing him and getting him to cuddle with me again, which took no convincing on my part. As I'm writing this, I'm lying in bed and he's fallen asleep against my chest while snoring very loudly. I don't think I'm going to be able to get any sleep myself tonight. We made plans to go on a weekend getaway this week. Dee is going to stay with her cousins for the time being, which she is very excited about since they have a pool and she loves to swim. I am forever grateful to everyone who decided to leave a comment and who helped me through this, as I can only see our love growing stronger after this. My only regret is not having caught up years before all of this happened, but there's nothing I can do about the past, and I'm just going to focus on repairing and rebuilding our marriage. My husband told me to tell you all that he says thank you for all the concern and for also slapping some sense into him about his behavior. He even made a joke about just taking our problems to Reddit every time instead of paying so much for counseling sessions. This is going to be the only update unless our house blows up or something. Thank you to everyone who took the time out of their day to read and listen to my story. If you're going through something similar, I heavily advise you sit down with your significant other and get to the root of the problem. Trust me, it will do wonders for your relationship. Edit, I forgot to add this in, but he explained that the reason he walked away when Dee was having a conversation with him was that he'd been really overwhelmed that day and felt like he was going to pass out. In all honesty, she was starting to get on his nerves. He apologized to her about it and promised never to do it again. Dee was very sweet and understanding with him, and I am very proud of both of them.